Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. So what I plan to do with my time is to tell you about an engineering research center that's in place. It's been going for a few years now, and then focus on two projects that my lab has been working on that I think relate to this session, precision ag and technology, and how it hopefully will help with your businesses and the whole peanut industry. So the first thing that I want to tell you about is this National Science Foundation funded engineering research center called the Internet of Things for Precision Agriculture. And this is a 5-year project. It's the largest award that NSF gives. It's meant to focus on addressing the issues that are holding back precision agriculture now. So I have a lot of hope, and it's a very exciting engineering center to be a part of. It involves multiple institutions, and there are a lot of people that are involved in it. They're mostly engineers, but there are also people on the plant science side of things, plant pathologists and others who will work together to come up with solutions that will hopefully move forward precision agriculture. So they touch on areas such as the sensor side of things, communication and energy systems, and the agricultural response side of things. So a broad spectrum of things. And one thing that's important about this kind of engineering center is that it's driven by industry partners. So if you look at the list, I don't know how well you can see the logos, but you'll recognize several companies that are involved as members of that ERC. So some of them are on the enabling technology side of things, others on the ag systems integration. So you see Corteva, Bayer, FMC, John Deere, Syngenta, and then end users or other groups. So we have grower groups, we have SunSouth, which is a sponsor of this session, I'll point out, Cotton Incorporated, and what I'm really hoping to emphasize, we have premium peanut involved too. What my goal is to make sure that we try our best to make sure that what we come up with is useful to the peanut community. So I would really encourage you to become involved if you aren't already. So don't focus on the details. All I want to show is that there's a lot of different aspects that people are working on as part of this project, and it's much bigger and broader than my particular area. But all those engineers have different expertise. I serve as a test bed lead, which basically means that I help to explain what some of the problems are, and then help test and deploy the technologies that they come up with and give them feedback. And so that starts at the research level, but then moves out to the farm scale, where people on the farm can provide input and feedback. So that's also driven by that stakeholder group, and we've come up with a few key problems that we're focusing on at first, and one is integrated systems to optimize nitrogen management in row crops. I think that's a major issue that many different states are facing, and grower groups. Another one is integrated optimization of water use in tree crops, because this involves California and they have big issues with water resources. And a third one that's most relevant to this group is focused on mitigating crop losses due to disease. And that's where I think there's a biggest opportunity, as far as I'm concerned, with peanut, where we can contribute. So the way the center works is there are many different projects that are focused on different areas, but some of the ones that I think are potentially groundbreaking or maybe game-changing come in the form of beyond 5G communications that will help facilitate the use of these technologies in remote areas that don't have good internet access, which is a limitation for many technology applications. Biodegradable sensors, low cost, on the order of cents per sensor, that can be spread across fields and provide input or information from the field that hasn't been possible before. Autonomous swarms of drones, like you heard Steve talking about that drone applicator. There are many different applications for those kind of tools, ground-based robots, aerial robots. So all of those things this is forward-looking, but these are the kind of tools that you will have eventually in your toolbox. So now just that was the high level, big picture, because I can't explain everything in such a short time, but I'll focus on two projects that are really more related to my expertise, where the engineering meets the plant pathology side of things. So the first one is called Sentinel. It's basically focused on using sensors to scout and provide plant health monitoring information. So to use a sensor-based system, the way we're thinking about this is that there's multiple different times that it might be useful. If you start with sensors that are focused on early detection of disease, possibly pre-symptomatic detection, in-field environmental sensing, because I'm interested in developing predictive models that help anticipate disease issues, and we often need environmental sensors in the field, and there are all kinds of issues that we deal with having sensors in the field. And then quantifying disease using remote sensing, so those are all different aspects of this. But what I'll focus on here is work that Rebecca Barocco has been doing, basically using remote sensing, drone-based tools with multispectral imagery to quantify defoliation of peanut. And so this is work that's been accepted and just about to be published. But for those of you, defoliation in peanut is often caused by early or late leaf spot, rust. You can also lose plants to white mold, or you can have impacts on the canopy due to tomato spotted wilt virus. So there are many different pathogens that can cause issues with your canopy. So why are we trying to quantify defoliation using this tool? Basically, there's research applications, and then there's the more commercial side of things. So on the research side of things, I'm limited by the ability to assess disease, either me or specialists in our team who have the expertise to be able to evaluate defoliation accurately. So you have to train people, it's expensive to have people, so it limits how much we can do in terms of evaluating products for efficacy. Barry Tillman, as a breeder, may be evaluating breeding material for disease resistance and in terms of defoliation, so that allows him to potentially scale his breeding program. So those are some of the research applications. On the commercial side of things, one big opportunity that I think exists with this is in terms of instructing harvest management, because if you can assess, we know that with defoliation you have issues with loss of yield, essentially because of difficulty with inverting vines. But if you can assess the state of defoliation and use a model that was developed by Dr. Dan Anko from Clemson, that can help anticipate what the expected yield loss might look like, maybe give you a week of notice, being able to predict what might happen in terms of a tropical system if you can't get back into the field, and thinking about prioritization of fields and logistics. So the reason why this is useful, especially sometimes over people, is that we have subjective bias when we're rating. It's helpful to have reproducibility when you're trying to distinguish treatments. So if you have reproducibility, we can assess and find the differences between treatments more consistently, which is very helpful. And the drone-based method is quite quick in terms of covering trials or fields. So just to get into how we've approached this, we know that there's a lot of variability across fields, individual fields and seasons. So you might have a field that has an issue with nematodes, and that will have an impact on the growth in that field, and that's inherent to that field. Or it could be a seasonal issue with deer feeding, and so when you're trying to estimate defoliation, it's always relative to the maximum potential of that field in terms of the canopy growth. So we account for that by calibrating for the peak growth of the peanut canopy in the season. And then basically what we do is have baseline flights that are at about the peak of the canopy growth, and then flights at times when you want to assess defoliation after that. And we use different vegetative indices that exist or have been published, so GNDVI, green NDVI, and MSAVI, which are different modified soil vegetation index, basically. But what we can then do is either extract an area, we calculate these for a plot or a field, and you get a visual representation of what it looks like. we can extract that as actual information, as data, that then we can calculate what the defoliation looks like and create a map or extract that information for an individual plot. So, for us on the research side of things, if you look at what the figure on the left is, green end of your eye, that's what the canopy growth looks like. So at about 75 or maybe it's 85, 90 days, there's the peak canopy growth. And then you see it decline when there's loss of foliage because of disease. On the other side, on the right, that's where you're quantifying the defoliation that's happening using that defoliation index. So the way that this was developed was we took information from field trials in multiple locations over 3 different years, and we had 1,700 observations of plots. So an expert went to the field, assessed each of those plots, and we had 1,700 of them. So a good number of plots that were estimated, and the relationship between the expert assessing it and the drone-based method was very good, with a relationship of 0.84, which just means 84% of the variability could be explained by that model. So 1 would be perfect. And if we apply this and use it to evaluate a research trial, what you see on the left is what you see on the left is just our ratings over time and how defoliation progressed with the human expert, and then next to it is the UAS, the drone-based assessment. And on the right-hand side, there is the actual different fungicide efficacy programs that we were evaluating. So you can see on the top layer, that's where the person rated the trial, and then the lower one is based on the drone-based assessment. And essentially the treatments were comparable, or the separation of the treatments were comparable either way, whichever way we used it, which is very useful if you want to be able to evaluate more programs. We did this again with a different person rating just to make sure it was we were able to do it consistently, and found similar results, so I won't spend time on that. So I think some of the applications, it's obviously useful for later season defoliation assessment. It'll help us as researchers. We think there's potential for commercial use of this too, but that's where we'll need input and to move that forward, to work with growers to test this. It's not going to replace in-field scouting or even having an expert in the field to understand what the issue was that was actually causing the defoliation. It's not capable of doing that, so you have to recognize that limitation. So now the second project that I want to tell you about is we call smart spray systems, and that's to improve input use efficiency. And basically our goal here is to develop the algorithms that someone with an applicator, whether it's a drone or tractor-based system, even traditional ground-based applications, could use to best time their applications. So we plan to use information from the previous project, the Sentinel type of approach, to feed into this project. But what's exciting, and where I think we make our contribution here, is where the engineering comes together with the plant pathology. So you have advances that are being made in terms of the sensors in the field, and then we have our understanding of the pathogen that's causing the disease. So in this case, the pathogen causes white mold. You have tiny little survival structures that allow that pathogen to live from season to season, and that's a critical stage for the disease, for us to be able to target the disease, essentially. So a grad student, Santosh Sanjal, did work focused on the epidemiology of white mold, and really what his focus was on this germination of those sclerotia in the field, or in general, basically, the factors that influence that, because basically, I don't know if you've seen them before or not, but there's a picture that shows those tiny little round structures that are created. They survive. They can survive for several years, but they have to germinate, grow. The mycelia that come out of it reach a plant, and they cause infection, which leads to eventually, the stem being infected and dying. So that's the sclerotia germinating, I think, is a key point in that life cycle for us to influence, and the mycelia that comes out of it, that's the sensitive part for in terms of fungicide use. So if you've heard an extension talk by a plant pathologist, you've probably heard us talk about the disease triangle and the fact that you have to have a susceptible variety, you have to have the pathogen present in your field, and you have to have a conducive environment. So what some of Santosh was doing was figuring out what are the key factors, the environmental factors and others that are associated with infection or disease incidence of white mold. So in a very detailed way, what he did was he took those sclerotia, the survival structures, and created experiments where basically he looked at temperature, soil moisture, different isolates of the pathogen on different soil types and all the interactions between those things to look at how those factors influenced germination of those sclerotia. And he could do this in a controlled environment because we could very tightly control the soil moisture and the other factors that we can't do in the field, which is very challenging, and there's a lot of variability with this disease, so it makes it very difficult to work with. But basically, he did a lot of laborious work to figure out when those sclerotia germinated after exposing them to those conditions. So what he then could do is use modeling to be able to figure out the relationship between a factor like temperature and moisture and the germination of the sclerotia. So the lower figures on the bottom right there are what he came up with, which are the relationship between temperature and moisture explaining the germination of those sclerotia. So if we understand that, then we can take that information out to the field and find those high-risk conditions for when that's actually happening in the field. So he did field trials across different environments and years where he took the sclerotia and inoculated them next to the peanut plants and then went back several times to assess when disease occurred over the season. And at the same time, we had environmental sensors out in the field looking at temperature, relative humidity, soil moisture, when canopy closure happened, all of those different factors, so that we could figure out exactly when and what was associated with disease. So he did or tried various different modeling approaches to figure out what factors were associated with the disease. And luckily, what we tried to do was focus on ones that we can understand what the outcomes are from those models, because you could use AI and you may have a black box that gives you a prediction that we don't actually have any inference from. It means we can't actually understand what the key factors are. We used methods that allow us instead to understand what the actual environmental variables were that were driving that infection. And so based on just a couple of predictors, he could explain most of the incidence of white mold and at least separate into low, medium, and high risk conditions based on two predictors, or looking at whether over a 14-day period of time with these two predictors, and that shifts over time. So you're looking to see how suitable it is. And the idea with this is that once we take it to the field and actually use it to inform decisions as far as choice of active ingredient or the timing, shifting the timing of application, that it would be complementary to something like Peanut RX, which gives you your pre-season risk assessment based on key factors that influence white mold. So what this work does is it gives you that in-season information that might allow you to plan or shift your plans basically a little bit depending on what happens in the actual season. And going back to what the engineers are doing with the sensors, we need information from the field. We have to drive these models, we have to have the sensors in the field collecting the information. And that's getting better. There's improvements in that, which is making it more cost-effective and practical to do that. But there are also other technologies that I think are going to change things in terms of satellite data that's available. So one example is this soil moisture, active passive surface wetness in the top 5 centimeters of the soil, because soil moisture is an important input for us, but the thing is that you have to have the soil moisture sensors out in the field, and if not everyone has that, then we are limited in terms of what we can do. So you could use the map on the right, which is basically showing soil moisture based on the satellite imagery, to help us estimate what's happening in a particular field, even if there aren't sensors in that field. So we're excited about moving these things to the next step, because this is still just at the point where we need to take it to the farm, basically. But that's what I wanted to share with you. So we have this defoliation tool, which hopefully will be useful for harvest management and for our research purposes, and then this new prediction tool for white mold, which matches up. What I will say is it matches up to what's recognized or thought, but it turns it into a value, or a system that could, create an app or give you an unbiased estimate of the conditions. So with that, there's several people I want to acknowledge for their contribution in our team, and then especially the funding sources, National Peanut Board, our Florida Peanut Producer Associations, IoT for Ag, and other funding groups that help support this work. So with that, thank you for your attention.